one of the candidates. They're all top in the field, and she is right up there with them. She is the adjunct professor in our department, as you know already. She's contributed greatly to our department with alumni and just creating a kind of a more experimental attitude and open towards typography and graphics, motion graphics, thinking about ways to approach design that is innovative and in new ways, and really just being a wonderful person to be around, as you well know. She has award-winning projects for print and web and has exhibited at the San Francisco MoMA, most recently in New Acquisitions Experimental Design. She has been recognized by the American Center for Design, American Institute of Graphic Arts, the Type Directors Club. Her work is featured at Emigre, which is very famous, Print, ID, Zoo, and published in various anthologies, including Graphic Radicals, Radical Graphics, The Graphic Edge, and Typographics 4. Now I'll read this. I can't resist. She cut her teeth writing for the experimental and influential typography journal Emigre. Please give Gail a warm welcome.
Thank you for coming. Thank you to my class for coming. Okay, hello. Can you hear me all right? Oh, sure, that'd be great. So that's my name, for those of you who don't know me. Most of you know me, so I won't repeat it, and that's the date today. I'm going to talk today about lycanthropic typography, which the most famous example of lycanthropy is the Wolfman. Let me get rid of all this stuff. Some beautiful type there. And I really want to explore just kind of briefly at the beginning of this talk type that transforms, type that goes through changes, type that has... Could I get a tiny little light up here? Aha. Beauty. Type that goes berserk, role-playing, fetishism, all in relation to type and typography and design. This is a computer programmer in San Diego who has gone so far as to have latex whiskers implanted. He's had his face reconstructed and extensive tattooing, and has applied for a license to have leopard skin grafted to his skin. He's changed his name to Catman. So, actually, being hairy is not something that's so unusual. This is Julia Pastrana. She's a very famous singer and performer. And of course, we all know Stefan Sagmeister. So anyway, I want to talk about the wild type, the type that goes from being really polite, puritanical, straight-ahead type, and our social agreement with the letter form itself as to what it means, what it stands in for, and how these letter forms shift and transform into wilder forms of themselves. I want to talk about smelly type. I want to talk about how this lycanthropic type, as it changes from the polite forms that we know into more wild forms, that it can leave a scent. It has sound, It has expressive qualities. It's alive. And as we all know, letter forms are just standing in for other kinds of experiences, like sound, words, meaning. So please come along into my garden. And I'd like to backtrack a little bit and talk about what typography is and how we have this social agreement with what things mean. For example, it's a very complex system too. It isn't something that is easily quantifiable into one sentence. It's something that we are trained to do over our lifetime. Each of us approaches everything we see in a particular way, depending on, where we were born, our particular experiences, and so forth. So we look at something like this that doesn't even have type, but we know exactly what this is. We know kind of where it is. We know that this is probably in America. We know perhaps its age. And we know, best of all, that this is a place where we can get those stars that we all desire. And letter forms are forms that stand in for sounds. They stand in for, they're placeholders that we put together to form words. So letters go together to form words. Words go together to form thoughts. These thoughts are juxtaposed with different kinds of forms to make different kinds of meanings, to greater and lesser degrees of, greater or lesser degrees of meaning or intelligibility or legibility and so forth. We all approach these things in a particular way based on our experience. This sign, for instance, relies on us knowing, one, that that's a snake, and two, that snake is standing in for the letter C, which makes that sound K, and that this isn't just about something called R, it's car. We also associate different things with the snake, like it's really a badass snake, it's got a car in its coils. So it talks about a particular kind of culture and a cultural history. We can look at this, and even though we don't know exactly what it is, we still can read a lot from this. We know it's a tombstone. We know that someone's dead and that they're buried there and that someone had some kind of relationship with this person, because it was in a human cemetery, that they carved hard into their headstone. There's also a real materiality to that kind of letter making. Then there's also signs that make no sense to us unless we're in. This is a really strange and mysterious juxtaposition that puzzled me for a couple of years. And above all, doing typography and design is a collaboration. It's a collaboration in the same way that art is, in that you make something and that it's received. In design, you often have a client, or you're working with other teammates to make something. And all of those have a lot of play in what ends up with the piece and how it's perceived, what form it has. So anyway, this is a letter form. It's a very polite, nice, beautiful, exquisite letter form with a particular kind of anatomy. Typographers go crazy talking about this stuff at dinner parties. This is the beauty of the letter, and it has everything that a human has. It has weight, it has gravity, it has a particular way of sitting on the baseline. It has grace, it has armature, it has a skeleton. This is a letter form from the 18th century. It talks about perspective space and that this is actually a flat piece, but it's suggesting or I'll shout. Oh. Thank you. Okay. Is this working now? All right. A sample page of M's showing a very small range of M's. When we think of type in the 20th century, especially the earlier part, Bauhaus, we think of metal type and that kind of materiality, that kind of the restrictions and the expressiveness that are inherent in that kind of typesetting. Letter forms need to be on lines locked up on a press, so a roller can go over them with ink and the ink can transfer the type to a page. Here's some wooden type. Type takes on the qualities of whatever it's applied to. Here's some whipped cream type. It's starting to get a little wilder. Definitely has its relationship to Ed Ruscha's type. Here's some bestial type by Wegman, of course. Hershey syrup type and whipped cream type, making a really nice little dessert. This is by one of my students, Sarah Cummins. This is type by Josh Nimoy called Vudu Type, and these are all hand-sewn letter forms that are pinned to a board. Of course, the type we see every day on every wall and trash cans, very expressive, very beyond the edge of what's considered nice type or polite type. This is definitely some wild type. Here's some wild type that's very elegant and beautiful. And then Cameron McNall's Hollywood Shadow Project, playing with the idea of ephemeral type, the type that changes as the sun moves it across a building. There's more permanent type that's actually kind of wild too, in relation to how we consider nice type or type that's doing a particular job. But it's very expressive, and it also gets into the idea of what kind of language accompanies these things. I mean, there's something really beautiful and poetic about Mrs. Rachel Clanks, formerly Mrs. Ewell. These are some ancient as 10th century dimensional type. The quintessential type that was to solve all the ills of the world, Herbert Bayer's Universal, the unicase type. It's interesting to look at some of these forms and some of these geometric ways of looking at typography and how that starts to shift as type gets a little wilder. This actually is the alphabet. This is Aldo Novares's typeface. This is a typeface based on sounds. This is a Cherokee typeface that was recorded by someone. It was very beautiful, very elegant in its forms and the way it suggests perhaps the way your tongue works in the mouth where it touches the teeth, how your palate responds. This is the Mormon Deseret alphabet based exclusively on sounds, and again to represent how those sounds might be made. From time to time, alphabets like these emerge where people try to approximate what a sound might look like, which is always interesting and difficult to show. This is Cyrillic typeface. And then typefaces that completely fall apart, that no longer look like typefaces or resemble typefaces, but really aren't, or they are, or they function in that weird twilight zone of not really knowing, which I find endlessly fascinating. And then, again, this is the letter A, but we don't really know it's the letter A except in context. So I only know that this is an A because I saw the rest of the word. Anyway, so this is type that starts to go berserk, that falls apart, that meaning begins to strip away except in context. The word berserk comes from Old Norse warriors that would become bears in battle. They're not quite sure if they actually transformed into bears or if they were wearing bear shirts, which is the origin of the word berserk, bear shirt. There's lots of drugs involved, drinking of blood, and of course, furious power. The idea, the affliction of lycanthropy, they think probably was caused by the fungus ergot growing on rye. And people actually did go out into the woods and to begin to dig and think that they had claws and would attack small animals and eat them. This is an alphabet I'm working on right now that, again, as you move into, as the machine starts to enter into the equation, it opens up a whole new way of thinking about what can type be. And type can be rotated in space, it can be stretched and molded and kind of racked. This really fantastic train wreck that we're all capable of now with the machine. You do lose legibility. As you spin a letter, it loses the form that we recognize as being the structure of the letter form. It maybe reminds us of certain things, but it's no longer readable unless it's put into a context where it can be read. This is just a letter form spun, which ends up being a nice form, but essentially meaningless unless it's an O. We can't have a whole alphabet of O's. So letter forms, is this a letter form or is it not? It's not in the way that we were looking at that first letter form, the A where it was, or the R where it was standing nicely on the baseline. This one is a series of kind of furry scratches, and it suggests dimensionality. It suggests a letter form, but it's not really a letter form. But we all are willing to go along for the ride and say, yes, this is a B. I'm going to back up a little bit and look at some illuminated manuscripts where there's a really interesting relationship between the typography and the word. In a lot of the manuscripts, animals stand in for people. In this case, they're standing in for the apostles. In this case, these decorated initial caps are, they stand in as reminders to keep your mind on the text. Quite often in these cap letters, there's a struggle going on between man and beast, or man and the devil. In this case, if you look closely, you'll see that the man is teaching the bear how to speak. So the man is saying ABC, and the bear is saying A. Since these manuscripts were considered divine, they were considered the Word of God, and they were handled with gloves. You didn't mess around with these things. There was no, each word of God calligraphed by the scribe is a wound inflicted on Satan. So these things had terrible, horrible, wonderful power. If you look at this one closely, it's very complex, but there's a huge struggle. This is the site where the spiritual forces and the diabolical forces are fighting it out. And these letter forms serve to represent this struggle, but to also remind the reader that it's about the word and it's not about the beauty of the letter, although these are really beautiful. It's about keeping your mind on the actual text. These were considered really alive and kind of dangerous forms. And you find a lot of initial caps where there's a warrior either killing a dragon, or the dragon and the warrior are fighting it out. Here is a crazy bird holding up a letter form. It's hard not to take into consideration the decorative qualities of these things. I'm most interested in the places where the decoration almost goes overboard, where it takes over, that it almost destroys the legibility of the letter, but it's still a beautiful, graceful, interesting form. A lot of typography that's being done digitally now has its roots, obviously, in Dada, in Surrealism, which you're all quite familiar with. Here's Marinetti's description of a car drive through the mountains. So it's not even words, it's all about the sound. And the way that the page was approached in these cases is really extraordinary. When you think about these things being letterpressed and set up to be printed, and the limitations and the restrictions of the printing press, these become really extraordinary feats of printing and typography. Things that we consider really simple to do on the computer now really required a lot of thought and process. This is Klutz's a design for one of his propaganda machines, so the type would be disseminated as these were spun. So then the Situationist is Guy Debord. Again, you can see a line from the Surrealist to the Situationist. And the Situationists come probably the closest to being lycanthropic with their use of drugs and alcohol to get lost in the city of Paris, to rethink how we look at society and so forth. The idea, I mean, this is not a new idea. We had Duchamp doing this before the Situationists, but taking an existing piece of typography and changing the words, changing the way something is looked at, changing an icon. And the children of the Situationists would be Grapus in Paris, Pierre Bernard, very political and amazing, strong work. This is Robert Brownjohn's title sequence for From Russia with Love, again, projecting the type onto a go-go dancer. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Bond sequences. And this is Lester Beale in the 50s. Again, you can see the direct relationship back to surrealism and the idea of dreams, dream imagery, disturbing juxtapositions, the use of the photograph, setting up kind of crazy nice settings and photographing them, concrete poetry. This is something from the 1984. This is Hans Schmidt. It's a lucite tower of letter forms. And in some of these cases, I admit that I've just become seduced by the image more than what it says. And I think that's always been a problem in especially design magazines and other publications where it's all about the lusciousness and this kind of wildness of the lively word. So I think that that's a constant struggle with experimental typography, is to find that place where it can be both, where it can do a job but also continue to push in new ways. This is Ed Ruscha, very California. And you know, this is in transition too. These are letter forms that are starting to. They're holding this form for just a moment. Robert Indiana's Love, paired up with Christopher Wool's Riot. And here's something, and this is unschooled or unknowing perhaps, but incredibly beautiful and incredibly economical in the way that the letter forms are constructed and applied to the sign. And very effective. I don't know how Ben Pena did, but he would get my vote just on this. It's hard not to talk about type that's gone wild or transformed without talking about emigre, which is a really influential 20th century phenomena. Now in their 15th year. So I think when we look at emigre today, it's hard to imagine the impact this magazine had on the design world. It was one of the first places in recent history where the design discourse became prominent, where designers showcased work that wasn't being seen by the mainstream. A lot of design organizations have championed design that walks a particular kind of walk. And as we all know in this room, that communication's terribly complex, and this was one of the forums where this kind of complex message was discussed and celebrated and looked at and shared. I mean, that's one of the most amazing things, is that suddenly people that were working in obscurity became interesting people in the mainstream that we could talk about and look at and start to see design as a more serious profession. Not that it wasn't a serious profession, but the discourse about design is fairly young. It's only been in the last 10 years where there's been a lot of magazines that have grown up around the idea of design and what design could be. This is Martin Vanesky from Speak. I threw this piece in to remind myself to pause here. Digital type has opened up typography in a whole new way. I mean, I think when some of the examples I showed you from like the 10th century and the 12th century, amazing, crazy, beautiful work, definitely tool-driven. Those were done by hand. The machine gives type a whole new way of looking at things. This is one of my students' work where he has taken the letter forms, and when you click on different ones, it assembles it. So it's unintelligible until you click, and then it puts it together in different ways. This is see if I can loop it. This is a piece by Jeff Kaplan where he takes a bee and turns it around, dimensionalizes it, and then turns it inside out. While you're looking at that, I'm going to switch over to a video, if I can. This is a project by Matt Hahn. Oh, pardon me? No, this is a designer who works with dimensional type that reconfigures in space. Now, I need to go back to Scott Makela, some of the early Photoshop work. Now we all are familiar with that. This is J. Abbott Miller taking Susanna Lichko's modula ribbed and dimensionalizing it. But you can see it's as he rotates it and moves above it, it starts to lose its F-ness. This is Elliot Earls taking type into a whole new candy realm. Of course, Ed Fella, who does not use the computer, but comes up with amazing, strange shapes with pencils and pens. It's Denise Gonzalez-Crisp. She calls herself a decorationalist. So she uses the computer as a sewing machine that can endlessly repeat things, that can move things around quickly, making juxtapositions. This is another one of her pieces. This is another piece by Jeff Kaplan, where the letter forms have been transformed into strange plastic floating things that make up letter forms, much like Matt Hahn's piece. And then this is a project where they took the modulations of the voice of Hal, the computer, and created these pieces. They're not actual pieces, they're virtual, or they're not physical pieces, they are actual pieces. And this is a work by 1/9. We're getting quite used to looking at three-dimensional type that looks like this. So far, most of it's been extruded, but I think we're on the brink of things starting to get more interesting and exciting. And this is one of our students, Mike Rada's Hot Rod, which connects motion, sensors, and sound. This was done in Jennifer Steinkamp in my tangible type class last fall. Anyway, I'm going to run through some of my own work. This is a project I did for SF MoMA for Art and Technological Times. This is a catalog. It's kind of deceptive to look at it up on the screen because it is indeed a book. And it looks like a book, it smells like a book, it's got pages. It functions in time and space. It can be put in a bag. It can be read in the bathtub. It was designed to be read in the tub. It was also designed to be read on foot. It's based on, since they wanted a book for this project, which seemed really interesting for an art and technology show, because one would think that they would want a digital component to this only and nothing old school like a book. So the fact that they wanted a book made me think that I needed to go back to some of the first books. So I looked back at illuminating manuscripts and took some of the proportions and ideas and the way that attention was called to the letter form in those books and based this one on that. So each essay has an illuminated section that they called these thought pieces. So they would accompany an essay. And I tried to exploit what could be done digitally as opposed to what the scribes had done with pen and paper, and how the forms that they made could be translated or transformed or moved into a digital way of looking at them. But again, it's paper, and it ends up on paper with 4 corners and a back and a front. This is a catalog that is currently at the printer for Jennifer Steinkamp. What's interesting about this piece is that Jennifer asked me to write a piece for it. So seeing as that Jennifer and I are from this very cold place far, far away, I wrote about ice pods, which we both spent our youth making. But it's a new way to think about design. Actually, it's not a new way. Designers didn't used to be so specialized, but to think of these pieces as more art pieces in themselves, and how you can direct the read, how you can add to the content, how you can make content, and what happens when you do that. This is a project I'm working on with UCLA alum Drew Hodgson. This went to press this morning at 6 a.m. It's a catalog for CalArts, hoping to entice students to go there and pay a lot of money. So what Drew and I came up with for this was to show the school as a container for this kind of process and activity, and also looking at decorative things, decorative motifs, going a little bit crazy but restrained with the decoration. I'm sure all of you recognize this because I think there's a stack of them laying around in White Gallery. This was a poster for the lecture series here at UCLA. It was a two-sided poster. One side of the poster talked about the inside of the brain and what kinds of tics and explosions were happening in the brain, and the other side of the poster was about the body and the hand and the making and the human qualities. So it actually has a stand-in for a human there. It has a little kind of a monument to the Third International with a crank and a light bulb that lights up, and it also has guts and innards that are filled with urine and Karo syrup. One side a little bit more traditionally set up, the other side obviously a little bit more about the computer and how when we design on the computer every part of the screen is activated, so it's difficult to see things as a whole. It becomes about a sum of non-hierarchical parts. This is a catalog for Laura Owens that I worked on with her. It was an unusual art catalog because when Laura and I started working on this, we discussed the fact that, as you guys know, when you look at an image in a book, it's not the actual piece. It's a representation of it. It's a printed facsimile of it. So we wanted to make this book not quite so precious with the way that the type and the pieces talk to each other. So in a traditional art book, you usually have the text, and then you have the image, and then you have a caption that politely stands away from it. And we all agree with those conventions. So in this book, we wanted to get a little bit more aggressive with it. I brought the book so you can take a look at it, because again, it's completely out of context, blown up to be huge when it's actually a little teeny book like this. But Laura did about 100 drawings, and they play with the type. They crawl between lines. They go a little crazy. This is a project I did with General Working Group. It's for green, sustainable architecture and design. And when we sat down to think about this project, we came up with the idea of the hive being the perfect system. Not only do bees have this complex way of communicating with each other, it's perfection, it's beauty. There's nothing in the hive that's wasted except the drones that are kicked out in the fall just to make space. And this one, we wrote the text too, so it has another layer of meaning. It's kind of a straight ahead text with some sly asides in it. This is a poster we did for an architectural group, and the title of the conference, which is difficult to see on the screen, but it's Design Currency. So we wanted to talk about what is current, and will the idea of something being current finally run out? Is our fascination with having something new always going after that? Is it ever going to end? And why do we crave this idea of currency? We also played with the idea of currents and electricity and water and so forth, and currency as money, and how that desire for something current or cash or whatever is generated. So there's kind of a useless machine at the bottom that generates desire for currency. This is another poster I worked on with Jeff Kaplan. The poster previous to this for LA Free Waves was a can with a can opener next to it. So we wanted to open the can and see what was inside. And we attempted to make the most disgusting poster we could, but I don't know. Jury's out on if it was truly disgusting. This is a project for an Italian magazine that requested some spreads that talked about what my design philosophy was, and at first I thought that I had a more workman ethic towards making work, that I go to work, I make stuff, I eat dinner, I go to bed. But I realized that as I thought about it that it's more about the process, and what I find interesting about design is that process and that intellectual place that you can find between what the client wants and what you make. And that you constantly need to set up exercises for yourself, to throw yourself off kilter, to see the world in a different way, and to make things that are new and interesting. Moving to California has definitely influenced me. Just the sunlight itself has changed my color palette, the way I work. This is a project that I worked on for Paul McCarthy. This was sold in his 100-foot tall inflatable Pinocchio that was at the World's Fair. And you enter in between his legs. I think I'm on. Can you hear me on this? Okay. You enter between his legs into a room where there's vending machines, and you can buy these candy bars that are actually too big for your mouth and too much to eat in one sitting. And they're rods like his nose. I gained quite a bit of research on that project. This is an art announcement. Photos by a 4-year-old. It's interesting what 4-year-olds find interesting. Sockets. This is some work I did for Emigre. When they first invited me to work up there, they asked me to do an issue, and I assembled a cast of 4 women to interview and talk about their work and where they saw themselves in the world. I was also continuing with some other projects I was interested in at the time, the idea of things being awkward or not quite right on the page, what is correct, what is nice, what is not nice. Lori Makala, who's now the chair of Arts Center Design Department. Sami Kim, who is one of the principals of Reverb in Los Angeles, Barbara Glauber, who's the principal of Heavy Meta in New York, and Susan Laporte, who's a director it's the Center for Creative Studies in Detroit. So when I interviewed them, they were all kind of at various points emerging in their careers and have gone into different directions. Right. It's like I really do like to write and direct the content of what I make, and choose projects where I'm allowed to do that to some degree. So it takes a client that is interested in that kind of form making and content making, and is willing to give up some of that power. So this was the opening spread for broadcast. Poster for Ed Fella, and I wanted to do something that Ed couldn't do with his dingbat typeface. Was he can't just hold down a key and endlessly repeat something. He can't italicize it. I can bold it. I can layer things up very quickly. So it's really about the digital process as much as the printing process. This is a book on sleepwalking done with Amy Gersler. It's a very, very tiny piece with a little pillow, and each spread shows a floor plan with a particular kind of sleepwalking path and a dream next to it. This is some of the work that I've done in the past that really was about this kind of wildness and this place between rational and things getting a little bit out of control, formally and meaning-wise, and letting things slip. This is a 5-foot-tall poster about somnambulism. Oops. Here's a close-up of the little teeny book. Work for SciArc, how we make meaning and how meaning is from making and so forth, a little machine. This is another project that I worked on for a while with Los Angeles and internationally based artists. This cover is by Paul McCarthy. It's a fanzine about snow and the love of snow. It's edited by Benjamin Weissman and Lisa Ann Auerbach. Here's a couple of spreads. It was originally based on Martha Stewart's living, and I wanted, the usual fanzine is a little bit more raw, and I wanted to make something that approximated prettiness. There's a promo call to action. How am I doing on time? Pretty good? I have some student work I'd like to show. I might zip ahead a little. I have, you've probably seen this piece, but I'm going to show a couple of these digital pieces that were done in classes. This is by Ben Kawaichi, showing how a lock works. Their assignment was to make a toy and then animate that toy in some way, typographically. This is a screen grabs from an interactive exhibition where the student made a piece. They curated a show called Fourth Space, and it was about exhibition design. And you would grab the piece and navigate through this space, this box. This is the wonderful interface that Josh Nimoy designed for the most recent undergrad design show. This is by Kristen Gillette. It's a surfing movie she made. A screen grab from that. This is a poster for the student tried to imagine where he was going to be in 40 years and what design would look like. And this is his vision of his work at that time. It was kind of in response to Ed Fella's talk when he was here, and he was talking about the 40 years of work previous to when he came to speak. So we turned it around and had them imagine where they would be. This is a poster for a project on seeing sound, an exhibition based on that, and a book that accompanied that. A poster for an exhibition on patterning. And this student's work, this is his exhibition that he put together about pop art and the influences of pop art on architecture, furniture, clothing, textiles, and so forth. Okay, I'm going to switch over and show. Let's see. I can show a couple. And I'm sure you've all played with Josh's Textension. Very wonderful way of thinking about typography and typography in motion and transition. I apologize for rushing through these, but let's see. This is Tiffany Wang's project that she did in tangible or in dynamic typography. It has sound. It's actually a lovely piece. What's so nice about this is how it puts the words back on the apple. This is a piece Gabe Dunn did for tangible typography, or excuse me, dynamic typography. Again, has sound, but seems to be not coming through. So again, that was a project where the assignment was, I'm feedbacking, to make a toy and then build some typography around it. I have a couple more to show you guys, and then I'll... If you have questions, please...
How did you make these interesting things there on the screen?
Oh, they're beautiful. How do I get rid of this thing? stupid. All right. Technology. So this is Ben Kawaichi.
Monsters are coming. Monsters are coming. Monsters are coming.
This is Craig Soji's.
Monsters are coming. Monsters are coming. Monsters are coming. Monsters are coming.
I'm going to show one last thing. This is
I don't want to move it too much because
Tangible Type taught with Jennifer Steinkamp.
okay, so every time you water it, the switch goes to the top and it starts the movie.
Irena.
And it's, can you turn it up? No, it's to the max. I don't know why.
It's on the max on the computer as well.
It takes a second. So it's kind of like the dark. It's breathing. Those are kind of like lungs or whatever. And this one, and this one just makes it move. And it's just fun. Like how many times you could just keep water. Every time you water, it does something else. That's the other one. The light sensor. Okay. And
Do they all say nurture?
yeah. And then shrink. It's just incredible to figure out how to do it. So, and that's like, it's kind of mimicking like what a plant would do, but it's the opposite. So, and that's kind of Irenia's. And that's all. Our challenge was making the interface work and having and not short out when you have water. A 2-inch maximum for
Your EZIO is right underneath.
yeah. That's the scary part. You have to be really
Somewhere else.
yeah. It was very daring. I wanted it to be contained and hidden, and then how would.
It's a very lovely piece made by Irena in the front row there, obviously. But the sensors, she had light sensors and float sensors that were attached to the project that made the type grow in certain ways, depending on how much water or light it got. So quite lovely, even with the EZIO board in danger of shorting out the school. Anyway, I'd like to end there, and I thank you all for coming. If you have questions, I know some of you need to run, but I will do my best to answer them. And please come take a look at the actual objects, because they're entirely different than the virtual projected ones. Oh, it's supposed to be done in 2 weeks, I think.
Yeah, I'm wondering, so many of the pieces that you've done in your classes are such a new genre of design. If you've thought about making a kind of space where those things are shown, the same way that Emigre, for the how many years ago, 14 years ago, it seems like you could make a gallery or an online space or something. Have you thought about that at all?
It's a fantastic idea, and I think this is the place. I mean, this is where this stuff is happening, and this is one of the most exciting places right now because of the ways we teach and what we teach. I hope that the new building has a place for them to be shown. Definitely the tangible type stuff, that needs to be more bulletproof, but it's fun, and I think people really, it's very physical, and people really respond to it. But as far as the forum, I don't know. It's got to grow out of here.
Or have you even thought about writing a book about this whole genre, something like this?
That's a good idea. Get on it. Yeah, soon. Right. Yeah, because it's kind of exploding, and I think here's an explosion of that kind of thing happening. Yeah, typing in a whole new way. But definitely with parents. I mean, it's not just coming out of the students' heads. It's coming from a long lineage of amazing typography and a way of thinking. So, thank you very much.